Welcome to Twilight Tales, where history drifts gently into sleep. Tonight, we journey back through time to ancient Greece, a land shaped by gods and mortals, where myths whispered meaning into everyday life. As oil lamps flicker in marble homes, and the Aegean Sea breathes softly against the shore, we'll explore how Greek mythology guided belief, culture, and the quiet rhythms of daily living. There is no need to stay awake. Let the stories of Olympian gods, sacred rituals, and ancient traditions unfold slowly as your thoughts begin to rest. Settle in, breathe deeply, and allow history to carry you into the night. It is said the Attic wind knows how to hush itself, not the sharp wind that scours the sea, but the softer one, the kind that arrives at dusk and seems to remember every name it touches. You walk beneath olive branches silvered by moonlight. Leaves turn slowly, like quiet coins of starlight being counted by invisible hands. The ground is pale with dust, and the trunks twist upward in old spirals, as if each tree is a thought the earth has been holding for centuries. Beneath the silence, a question drifts between the branches, gentle, persistent, almost tender. Why did a city choose an olive over a god's crashing sea? There are places where the past does not feel far away. It feels folded, like linen stored in a cedar chest, fragrant with time. This grove is one of those places. Here, history is not a lesson, it is a breath. And the olive tree, patient, ancient, star-marked by the night, stands as both object and oath. Its bark is a living script written in slow years. Each knot and scar is a sentence pressed into wood. Each leaf is a whisper that refuses to fade. Whispers tell us that long ago, when the city that would be Athens was still becoming itself, the gods turned their eyes toward it, not with sudden thunder, but with the careful attention one gives to a new flame. Two powers arrived, each bearing a gift. One was Poseidon, oceanic and restless. In myth, he does not enter quietly. He arrives like surf against stone, like salt on the tongue. His presence tastes of distance and depth, of storms that take ships and secrets alike. The other was Athena, clear-eyed, veiled in calm, not cold, but steady, the kind of steadiness that does not shout because it does not need to. Her presence is like a lamp kept burning through the longest night, small, unwavering, sacred. They stood on the height of rock, where the city's heart would one day beat in marble and song, and they offered what they had. Poseidon struck the ground, some say with a trident, some say with his will alone. The stone opened, and water surged upward, bright, forceful, alive, a spring born in an instant, a promise of ships, of power, of reach beyond the horizon. But the water, salted, oceanic, could not quench thirst. It dazzled, yet it did not nourish. Then Athena stepped forward, and where Poseidon's gift had erupted like a wound, hers arrived like a blessing that takes its time. She pressed something into the earth, an olive sapling, tender as a vow, and the tree rose, leaf by leaf, as if the ground had been waiting for it. Not a weapon, not a wave, a tree, and the city chose the olive. Not because it was grander in the moment, but because it would endure. because it would feed the mouth and light the night, because it would make a home feel like home. Where memory fades, the myth remains, softening into something more than story. It becomes a way of seeing, a lens held up to daily life, turning ordinary gestures into quiet rites. In the months of heat, the olives swell slowly in their branches, green and dark, like small planets growing heavy with promise. In the months of harvest, hands reach upward, fingers curl gently around fruit, careful not to bruise the skin. Baskets fill, the air is scented with leaves and crushed bitterness. And then comes the press. Stone, weight, patience. The olives are turned and ground, their flesh becoming a dark paste. Water is added, and the paste is pressed beneath heavy beans. At first, it seems like nothing happens, only the slow creak of wood, the hush of waiting. Then, oil appears, golden, warm, luminous, a liquid that seems to remember sunlight. In that moment, you understand why this tree was a sacred answer. Oil is not merely food, it is a bridge. It moves between worlds with quiet grace. It is poured into clay lamps, and the lamp becomes a small star held in a room. The flame trembles softly, as if afraid to disturb the night. Shadows gather at the edges of walls. The household breathes, and the breath is slower now, soothed by light that does not glare. Oil touches skin, too, before festivals, before games, before long days in the sun. The body is anointed not only for beauty, but as a kind of respect. In ancient Greece, the boundary between the practical and the sacred is thin as a veil. A thing can be useful and holy at the same time. In fact, that may be the purest holiness of all. In a courtyard, you imagine a small domestic shrine, nothing vast, nothing loud, a shelf of stone, a tiny figurine, a bowl of grain, a cup of water, bread laid down with quiet hands, a thread of smoke rising from a simple offering, and a few drops of oil, glistening like melted starlight. No one needs to announce the prayer. The gesture is the prayer. The offering speaks in the language of the everyday, cleaning, grinding, weaving, lighting, stirring. In these homes, the goddess is not distant marble. She is present in rhythm. A woman's hands pull wool through fingers, drawing thread from softness. A loom waits in the corner, its wooden frame patient as an elder. The shuttle moves back and forth, like a small heartbeat turned into motion. A cloth grows line by line, not unlike a story. Athena's gift is not only the tree, it is the idea that careful work can be sacred. Marked by the moon, the city itself feels like an offering made of stone and breath. Narrow streets, worn steps, amphorae stacked like sleeping vessels, the scent of oil and smoke, the distinct call of night birds, and above it all, the hill, where temples rise like pale dreams, where the Parthenon in later years would glow at golden hour like a calm flame carved into shape, where columns would stand as if holding up the sky's quiet weight. Yet even as we drift through this serene world, the grove begins to reveal its deeper mystery. Because Athens was not only wisdom and weaving, it was also ships and spears. It was debate in the sun and war beyond the horizon. Layer by layer, the olive leaves part like curtains, showing what the city carried like a hidden stone. Wisdom praised, yet pride sharpened. Beauty raised, yet war summoned. A city can choose an olive and still hunger for the sea. Poseidon did not vanish when the olive was chosen. His salt surge stayed in the city's bones. Athens became a place of harbors and triremes, of trade routes like arteries across the Aegean. The sea fed it, the sea threatened it, the sea tempted it with distance. So the two gifts remained locked together, Athena's green patience and Poseidon's saltwater unrest, like two truths that never fully resolve. And perhaps that is the secret the grove holds. Not that one god won and one god lost, but that a city is made of contradictions the way a tree is made of rings, layer upon layer, each year adding both strength and story. It is easy in myth to imagine a clean ending, a contest, a decision, a crown placed on the victor's brow. But in life, ancient or modern, nothing stays so neat. Choices ripple forward. They mingle, they tangle. The olive does not erase the sea. The sea does not uproot the olive. They exist side by side, like day and night, like breath in and breath out. In the days of the Panathenaic festival, when the city honored Athena with procession and song, the streets filled with meaning, woven cloth, peplos, was carried toward the goddess's house, a gift of labor and devotion. Wreaths of olive leaves circled brows. The air held music that felt like sunlight. And yet, beyond the celebratory hush, ships waited, politics shifted, rivalries pressed their sharp edges into the city's calm face. Beneath the silence, you can sense it, the way a sacred place can be both shrine and stage, both sanctuary and symbol. How the same hands that light a lamp with olive oil might also count coins for war. This is not an accusation. It is a human truth, ancient as dust. And in that truth, the grove becomes more than scenery. It becomes a witness. It watches centuries pass the way clouds pass, quietly, without clinging. It watches the city build, argue, expand, fracture. It watches names rise and crumble. It watches offerings laid down and forgotten. It watches temples weather into ruins, their marble softening at the edges like sugar left in rain. Still, the olive tree remains, not untouched, never untouched. Time touches everything, but enduring. And here, in this endurance, the implied forbidden knowledge grows clearer, not spoken, only felt. The gods may not win or lose. They endure in what people choose to tend. Not in thunder, not in proclamations, in tending. In the small, repeated acts that create a civilization's heartbeat, lighting a lamp, feeding a child, washing hands, pressing olives, weaving cloth, whispering gratitude, burying the dead with care, laying down bread for what cannot be seen. Perhaps Athena's true gift was never the tree itself. Perhaps it was the lesson that patience can be power, that a slow-growing thing can outlast a wave. Or perhaps the lesson is even quieter, that the world is not won by force alone, but carried by those who keep returning to the same gentle work. Now the grove deepens into night. The wind lowers its voice. The leaves settle, and the air feels full of listening. Somewhere an owl calls, a sound like a small question. Somewhere, far beyond the trees, the sea continues its endless motion, a dark hymn that never rests. You stand between them, olive and ocean, patience and longing, the green and the blue. And you begin to understand why this story is told at bedtime, why it belongs to the edge of sleep. Because it does not demand an answer, it offers a feeling. The camera in your mind moves closer to one branch, one leaf, thin, delicate, trembling. Moonlight catches its surface. The leaf shines softly, not bright, not sharp, just enough to be seen, just enough to remind you that even in darkness, something can hold light. In the background, the world fades, temples becoming silhouettes, history becoming hush, empires becoming dust, and the leaf continues to tremble, not from fear, but from being alive in a world that never stops changing. We leave as gently as we arrived, with sacred uncertainty. Whether Athena's voice ever spoke aloud, or whether the true miracle is simply this, that the tree still listens. Perhaps it was never meant to be proven. Perhaps it was only meant to be felt. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. A dim road leads to Eleusis, not a road of stone alone, but a ribbon of quiet intention, drawn through dust-colored hills where the air tastes faintly of salt, as if the sea itself has exhaled a memory and left it hovering above the earth. The path is old, older than names spoken in marketplaces, older than the small worries that cling to daylight. It curves like a slow thought, and each bend seems to ask the traveler to become softer, to shed the sharp edges of the ordinary. It is said that pilgrims walked here as if crossing a threshold inside themselves. And before we see any temple, before we hear any hymn, we are given an image, haunting in its simplicity, a closed mouth, not clamped shut by fear, not tightened by threat, but sealed by reverence, as one might cover a flame from wind. Silence here is not emptiness. Beneath the silence, something sacred is kept warm. Whispers tell us that once, in this place, people stepped into darkness willingly, into a ceremony famous across the Greek world, yet never truly described. No scroll preserves the heart of it. No poem dares to pry open its center. The mysteries were spoken of everywhere, and yet they were not spoken. And so the question arrives like a soft pulse behind the ribs. What did they see behind the veil that made secrecy feel holy? We approach gently, as though the question itself might bruise if handled too roughly, because some truths, like certain plants, cannot survive bright light. Some truths dissolve when dragged into language and displayed on a table like a captured thing. Perhaps the Eleusinian secret was not hidden to hoard power, but hidden to preserve its living breath. Marked by the moon, the road continues, and with it comes the first sorrow, Demeter. Not the marble Demeter of statues, serene and distant, but the Demeter who mourns in the way the earth mourns, slowly, thoroughly, with a grief that spreads like winter across fields. Her daughter, Persephone, taken beneath the ground, the story is known, yes, like a childhood tale, yet beneath the telling there is a deeper current, the moment when abundance vanishes, when the familiar order of nourishment breaks, and even the gods feel a cold absence. Demeter's grief moves like slow water through hearths and granaries. Grain sleeps, bread becomes scarce, lamps flicker lower, not because oil is gone, but because hope itself seems to thin. The world, once green with ordinary generosity, turns inward, as if holding its breath. Where memory fades, an ancient truth returns, that life can be interrupted, that the harvest is not guaranteed, that the warm hand of summer can slip away without warning. In Eleusis, the people did not treat this grief as a mere story. They made it a doorway. It is said that the mysteries began not with spectacle, but with preparation, purification, fasting, the careful untying of daily thought. You can almost feel it, the body growing quieter, the appetite becoming a lantern that points inward, the mind learning to listen to the spaces between sounds. The ceremony unfolds with meditative pacing, torchlight, murmured hymns, footsteps measured as prayer. No sudden drums, no sharp commands, only the slow geometry of devotion, one gesture following another like stars tracing their ancient roots. The night receives the pilgrims, and the darkness does not feel hostile. It feels like a cloak placed around the shoulders. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. The rites were held in honor of Demeter and Persephone, but they were also held for the human heart, for that tender part of us that fears endings and aches for reunion. And the beauty of Eleusis, whispered across centuries, is that it did not promise escape by denial, it promised renewal by passage. A paradox, gentle as incense hangs in the air. The mysteries were meant to console the living, yet they asked each soul to kneel before darkness first. Because darkness here was not the enemy, it was the gate. In the hush of those nights, daily life was woven into the sacred with a tenderness that feels almost unimaginable now. Bread becomes more than bread. A seed becomes a promise. The harvest becomes a story told by the earth in dust and green. The most ordinary acts, grinding grain, pouring water, lighting a lamp, become symbols, as if the gods have leaned closer to watch and bless the human hand. There is a cup, too, remembered in fragments, the kykeon, a barley drink, simple, earthly, almost plain, yet within ritual, plainness becomes power. Even water can become a threshold if the moment is prepared. In Eleusis, the sacred did not float above the world like unreachable perfection. It sat beside the fire. It lingered in the pantry. It breathed in the rhythm of seasons. And perhaps that is why it comforted so deeply, because it did not demand that the human be other than human. It is said the initiates entered the telesterion, the great hall of the mysteries. Imagine it not as a bright cathedral, but as a vast, dim chamber where shadow itself feels architectural, where stone holds centuries of exhaled vows. A veil is present in our imagination, whether literal cloth or the veil of secrecy itself. Behind it, something shown, something enacted, something revealed. But what? History gives us only careful footprints. We know the mysteries were widely celebrated. We know philosophers and poets spoke of them with awe, hinting at peace with death, at a transformation of fear. We know the initiates guarded the experience so completely that even under threat, even with the temptation of fame, the details did not spill into the world. And this is where the story grows more mysterious, not less. Because if the secret were simply a fact, some clever mechanism, some hidden object, some staged surprise, surely time would have broken it open. Surely someone would have written it down, the way humans always do when they want to be remembered. But the silence held. A closed mouth again. Reverence again. Perhaps what they encountered could not be carried out of the hall like a stolen jewel. Perhaps it lived only in the moment of seeing, like a dream that fades when spoken aloud, not because it is fragile, but because it belongs to a different language than waking speech. Beneath the silence, we sense the shape of forbidden knowledge, yet it does not feel stolen. It does not feel sharp or triumphal. It feels tender, as if the mysteries taught something that cannot be forced onto another mind, as if they offered a vision that must be grown inside the listener, like grain within dark soil. There are symbols that ripple around the edges, torches lifted in procession, sacred objects carried in covered baskets, a sudden brightness within the hall, the hint of a cry, "I have fasted, I have drunk, I have taken from the chest," words that survive like broken shells after a tide has moved through, and then silence again. The paradox deepens. People longed to escape death, yet honored it as part of the gate. They did not curse the underworld as only terror. They recognized it as a realm of return, where seeds sleep before they rise. If Persephone must descend, it is not only tragedy, it is also the pattern. The earth itself is an initiate. It receives loss, it holds it, and then, at the appointed time, it gives back green. Ulysses seems to whisper, "You too are of this pattern, not immortal in the way stones are immortal, unchanging, unmoved, but immortal in the way seasons are immortal, returning, reshaping, renewing." And if that is the heart of it, then no wonder the secret was kept, because the lesson is not an argument, it is not a doctrine, it is an experience. It is said that when the rite reached its height, something was shown, something that touched the initiates so deeply that they left changed, carrying a kind of inner hush like a lamp protected in the hands, not triumph, not certainty, but a softness around the fear of endings. Imagine leaving the telesterion at dawn, the sky pale as wet clay, the world quiet, as if even the birds are still dreaming, the road back to Athens not yet crowded, the stones cold beneath the feet, and inside the chest a new relationship with silence. Not the silence of ignorance, but the silence of having seen something too sacred to reduce. In the final reflection, the torches dim and the veil remains unlifted for us. We stand outside time's locked door and listen with our whole bodies. We do not force the latch. We do not demand the secret. We simply breathe near it and let it be what it has always been, a sanctuary for the unsayable. Perhaps the Greeks carried their secret not in words, but in the breath between heartbeats. Perhaps it was never meant to be found as a sentence on a page. Whispers tell us that some truths only open when the mind loosens its grip, when the listener becomes like earth in winter, willing to rest, willing to wait, willing to trust that something green is preparing itself beneath the dark. And as sleep approaches, Ulysses recedes into mist. The road, the grain, the torchlight, the ancient vow. The mouth closes gently. The name is not spoken, and somewhere, far beyond our waking reach, a veil stirs, quiet as a moth's wing, then settles back into sacred darkness, keeping its mystery warm. We begin at Delphi, not as a point on a map, but as a hush held between mountains, where stone rises like a slow hymn and the world narrows into a sanctuary shaped by height and breadth. Here, the slopes of Parnassus cradle the sacred precinct the way a sleeping thought is held behind the forehead, present, quiet, and strangely alive. It is said the air itself changes as you approach. The pines thin, the wind grows careful. Even footsteps seem to soften, as if the ground remembers how many questions have been carried across it and asks for gentleness. And the first image is not a statue, not a column, not even a flame. It is vapor. A pale ribbon rising from the earth, breath escaping a hidden chamber. It curls upward like a sentence that refuses to become a sentence. It lifts, hesitates, thins into the cool light, and vanishes, leaving only the feeling that something has just spoken without using a mouth. Beneath the silence, a question arrives, gentle as falling ash. Did Apollo speak here, or did humans learn to hear their own echo through a sacred veil? No answer rushes to meet us. Delphi does not feel like a place that gives answers quickly. It feels like a place that teaches the art of waiting. And waiting here is not empty time. Waiting is the first ritual. Waiting is the slow opening of the inner ear. The temple stands in cool shadow, its stones the color of sandstone, yellow and faded copper, weathered by centuries of sun and winter. The columns, some standing, some broken, hold the sky as if it were an offering laid across their palms. In the courtyards, dust gathers in spirals. In the cracks, small plants root themselves with patient faith. Where memory fades, stone remembers. Offerings gather like quiet prayers that have learned to become objects. A small jar of oil, dark as night held in clay. A sprig of laurel, dried and curled, still carrying its sharp green scent. Little bronze figures, tiny horses, tiny hands, tiny faces, set down gently on stone slabs, not with flourish, but with a kind of careful humility. Each gift says the same thing in different shapes. I do not know. I have come to ask. The world outside Delphi is loud with the ordinary. Markets, ships' ropes, quarrels, births, debts, harvests. But here, the ordinary is folded into the sacred like cloth into a chest. Voices lower, eyes rise. The air is full of an attentive quiet that makes even doubt sound holy. And then, deeper within, the oracle's chamber. Not a chamber of gold, not a throne room, a confined darkness. A place where torchlight cannot fully conquer the corners, where stone seems to drink sound. A space so old it feels less built than discovered, as if the mountain itself has kept a small hollow for listening. It is said the Pythia sits there, not as a performer, not as a queen, but as a doorway. She is seated above the hidden breath of earth, near the place where vapor rises, some say from a fissure, some say from an unseen spring. In the dimness, her presence is less a person than a threshold, where what is asked becomes something else, where language loosens its grip and turns to mist. Her words drift. They do not land like stones. They hover like smoke. A riddle, soft-edged and incomplete, as if the answer refuses to be pinned to a single meaning. You can almost feel the way the phrases arrive, broken, winding, tasting of laurel and ash, carried on breath that may not belong entirely to any one body. Whispers tell us the greatest power here is not thunder, not spectacle, it is ambiguity. The scene moves slowly, as it must. Sandals on worn steps, the faint scrape of bronze against stone as an offering is set down, the scent of smoke, not harsh but herbal, laurel and resin and something mineral beneath it, the smell of deep rock after rain, the hush, the long inhale before a question, the longer silence after it, as if the chamber is deciding whether the question is worthy of becoming smoke. Outside these walls, prophecy threads through daily life like a hidden stitch, a marriage postponed because the oracle's phrase sounded like a warning disguised as a blessing, a voyage delayed until a sign, until a moon, until the sea felt less offended, a law rewritten because an uncertain line, half poem, half shadow, was interpreted as divine preference. In the ancient world, to ask the oracle was to admit that life is a foggy coastline. We steer by what we can barely see, and we pretend our steering is certainty. Kings came here, generals came, merchants, mothers, farmers, lawmakers. The powerful and the ordinary all approached the same chamber with the same trembling humility, the knowledge that their plans were small compared to fate, and that sometimes the future must be approached sideways, like a deer approached through trees. And yet the contradiction opens like a soft gate. They sought clarity and received ambiguity. They begged for firm ground and were given mist. They asked, "Will we win?" and were answered with a sentence that could be read as triumph or disaster, depending on where the heart leaned. They pleaded, "Should we go?" and were met with words that seemed to shimmer between yes and no. Wars began from warnings meant to prevent them. Empires were shaped by phrases that could not be held still. It is said that certainty was never the gift Delphi offered. Perhaps the divine gift was something gentler and harder. The courage to walk forward without certainty, to accept that the future is not a door we open, but a path we meet one step at a time, in weather we cannot command. Beneath the silence, the implied forbidden knowledge glimmers, not in secret facts, but in the space between words. Because what is forbidden often is not information, it is the hunger for control. Delphi seems to teach the listener to loosen that hunger, to hold the world with open hands, to understand that a prophecy is not a chain that drags you to fate. It is a mirror held in smoke, showing you the shape of your own fear and desire. And maybe this is why the oracle's words became smoke. Smoke does not let itself be owned. Smoke cannot be nailed to a wall. Smoke enters the lungs and becomes part of you whether you wanted it or not. It changes your breathing. It changes your pace. It leaves a taste that lingers after the fire is gone. A prophecy, too, lingers. It is carried home in silence. It is turned over again and again at night. It is discussed in low voices by lamplight. It is misheard, mistranslated, reshaped by hope. And in that reshaping, something intimate happens. The seeker becomes part of the answer. Marked by the moon, the city-states of Greece sent envoys with gifts and questions wrapped like fragile glass. They consulted Delphi before planting colonies, before naming kings, before dedicating temples. The oracle sat at the center of so many decisions, like a still pond reflecting countless faces. And yet, quietly, Delphi was also a place of human craft. Priests arranging the procession, attendants tending the offerings, stewards guarding the rituals like a precious flame, scribes listening, recording, interpreting, a whole architecture of devotion built around the possibility of hearing something beyond the self. Did Apollo speak? Or did humans build a chamber so sacred, so still, that they could finally hear the echo they had been carrying all along? The question does not demand an answer. It drifts beside us like a lantern in fog. Inside the temple's shadow, we can almost sense how the mind changes. In the world outside, a sentence is expected to mean one thing. Here, a sentence means many. Here, meaning is allowed to breathe. Here, the heart is permitted to sit with uncertainty without immediately trying to end it. And so the oracle's chamber becomes less a machine for prediction and more a spiritual training ground, a place where the soul learns to be wide enough to hold two possibilities at once without shattering. The implied ritual is not only what happens to the Pythia, it is what happens to the listener. A person arrives with a tight fist around their question. They leave with an open palm, and in that open palm the smoke settles, not as an answer, but as a new way of walking. In the final reflection, the camera lingers on a cracked step near the entrance, stone polished by countless questions. The crack runs through it like a small river frozen in time. Dust gathers along its edge. A faint spiral of grit turns in the wind, then dissolves. The chamber empties. Torchlight gutters lower. Offerings remain, quiet as sleeping birds. And still the air feels listened to, as if the mountain itself has an ear, as if every question ever asked has left a thin residue in the stone, a kind of invisible incense that does not burn out. Where memory fades, the senses deepen. We step away from Delphi without a clear conclusion, as the ancients so often did. We do not carry a proclamation, we carry a hush. We carry the taste of smoke and laurel, the feeling of standing near an opening in the earth that breathes. Perhaps that is all an oracle truly is, a place where the world exhales, and we remember that we are not separate from its breath. Perhaps the answers were never meant to arrive like carved commandments. Perhaps they were meant to arrive as smoke, soft, shifting, impossible to grasp, so the soul would learn to breathe them gently. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and as sleep approaches, Delphi slips back into mist. The mountain closes its quiet mouth. The vapor rises once more, a pale ribbon becoming nothing, leaving only the sacred uncertainty behind. And in that uncertainty, strangely, there is peace. The opening image is a loom in a dim room. Not a grand loom in a palace hall, no trumpets, no marble crowds, only a wooden frame standing patient in shadow, like a simple altar built for the everyday. The beams are worn smooth by years of touch. The pegs hold their quiet tension, and the threads, pale as bone, warm as wheat, stretch in straight lines, as if order itself has been taught to stand upright. A shuttle rests near the base, shaped like a small, dark boat. When it moves gently, left to right, right to left, as if it were a small moon crossing a night sky of thread. Each pass makes a sound so soft it could be mistaken for breath, a hush with a rhythm, a private music. Beneath the silence, a question arrives, intimate as a whisper near the ear. How did the Greeks weave the gods into cloth, and cloth into fate? Outside the room, the world is stone and sun, streets, markets, the clang of bronze and the calling of names. But inside, the air is muted, warmed by wool and wood and the faint mineral scent of dye. Light enters in a thin band, catching dust that drifts like pale starlight. It is said that in such rooms, time did not march, it threaded. We enter the daily world of women's hands, hands that spin and knot and smooth, hands that know the exact weight of wool, the stubbornness of flax, the way raw fiber resists and then, slowly, yields. Hands that work not with drama, but with devotion, turning labor into a quiet liturgy. First, there is spinning, a spindle turning like a planet on its axis, patient and precise, a tuft of wool drawn out in a long, delicate line, thinning, tightening, becoming something stronger than softness. The twist is small, almost invisible, yet it holds the world together. Thread, after all, is just patience made tangible. Then dyeing, clay jars stained with faded copper and deep greens, vats that smell of crushed leaves, earth and smoke, skeins lowered into darkness and lifted into color, misty green that remembers olive groves, clay red like sun-warmed pottery, dusk sky blue like evening settling into stone. The fiber drinks the hue as if it were learning a new language. Then weaving, warp and weft, order and breath, a steady alternation that feels almost like thought itself, structured, repeating, quietly clarifying. The loom does not demand inspiration, it demands presence. And in that presence, Athena feels near. Not as a distant goddess carved in temples, but as a presence in the steadiness, the calm intelligence of hands that do not hurry. Athena, patron of craft and clear thought, lives in the discipline of making, in the clean line of a tensioned thread, in the careful counting of strands, in the way a pattern emerges when the mind stays steady. Whispers tell us that in Athens praised her not only for war strategy, but for the wisdom of making, the wisdom that turns rawness into form, chaos into cloth, need into shelter. A tunic for a child, hemmed to allow growth. A blanket folded and refolded for winter nights. A belt woven tight for Labor Days. A small strip of linen set aside as an offering for a shrine, because the gods, too, are honored in what the hands can give. In this world, cloth is not background, it is life's second skin. It wraps the body, yes, but it also wraps the milestones. It catches tears, it absorbs smoke, it holds the scent of bread and fire. It remembers every touch, the way a path remembers footsteps. Where memory fades, cloth remains, and in each strand there is an echo of myth. Arachne's story comes like a hidden thorn. It is said she was so skilled the gods themselves leaned close to watch. Her tapestry was flawless, too flawless, perhaps, Because perfection can sound like a challenge in the ears of the divine, Arachne wove truth into thread, images sharp as judgment, and pride rose with the pattern like smoke rising from a lamp. The myth does not speak gently about what happened next. Arachne's skill was praised and punished. The loom, that sacred instrument of creation, became a site of boundary. Create, but do not surpass. Be brilliant, but do not forget your place. The lesson lies like a quiet blade beneath the story. Athena blesses craft, yet demands reverence. The gods admire the human hand, yet recoil when it points too boldly at the heavens. Penelope's weaving arrives differently, like a long prayer stretched across years. Her loom stands in a hall filled with waiting. Each day she weaves, each night she unweaves, not from indecision, but from devotion, not from weakness, but from endurance, a pattern made of patience, a tapestry built not to finish, but to hold time in place until a beloved returns. In Penelope's hands, the loom becomes a shield made of thread, not loud, not violent, quietly unstoppable. And here, beneath the silence, the title deepens, the loom that sang for Athena. Its song is not melody, its song is rhythm. The soft knock of the beater bar, the whisper of fibers sliding into alignment, the faint creak of wood that has carried generations of effort. It is the sound of order forming in a world that often refuses to be ordered. And with every measured pass, time is threaded into silence. Layers deepen into sacred contradiction, because the loom is both freedom and boundary, creation and confinement. In the city's public light, men speak in assemblies, argue law, carve names into memory. In the home's private shadow, women make the fabric of existence, quietly, endlessly, often unnamed, often unseen, and yet absolutely necessary. The city praises wisdom, yet assigns silence. The gods bless skill, yet punish insolence. The loom stands at the center of this paradox, like a faithful witness. It is a place where the mind can be clear and sovereign, choosing colors, shaping patterns, building beauty, yet also a place tied to expectation, to duty, to the invisible walls of custom. Beneath the silence, the implied forbidden knowledge lies in patterns themselves, not in letters, not in proclamations, in images woven so subtly they can be seen only by those who live inside that same quiet. A spiral worked into a border, an echo of the sea and its returning waves, a star mark stitched near the hem, not meant for strangers' eyes, but for the wearer's secret remembering. A veiled symbol hidden in repeated geometry, speaking softly of grief, hope, hunger, longing. It is said that cloth can carry messages without ever speaking. A woman who cannot stand before an assembly can still weave a truth that will move through the household like smoke, settling into the lives of those who touch it. A warning in a motif, a memory in a color, a vow in a knot tied slightly differently than usual, recognized only by the hands that learned the same language. Here, prophecy is domestic, sacredness is practical, and the gods do not thunder, they hover. As the scene slows, we feel how cloth carried memory across thresholds, wedding veils, thin and bright as morning haze, lifted and lowered like a blessing, veils that soften the face, that turn a young woman into a figure both seen and hidden, an ancient contradiction made wearable. The veil says, you are entering a new life. It also says, a part of you must remain mysterious. Funeral shrouds, linen drawn over the body like a last kindness, the last garment offered by those still living. Cloth becomes a soft gate between presence and absence. The shroud holds the shape of what has left, and in doing so, it gives the mourners something to touch, something gentle when the truth is too sharp. Festival robes, brightened with dyes, edged with careful patterns, worn on days when the city tries to remember the gods in public. Cloth becomes celebration, becomes identity, becomes a moving tapestry of belonging. And for a moment, the labor of many quiet hours is seen, lifted into sunlight, alive with wind. Life's thresholds wrapped in thread, cloth as witness, cloth as keeper. The loom does not only make fabric, it makes continuity. It takes the scattered fibers of days and binds them into something that can endure, something that can be folded and saved, something that can outlast a season of grief. And still, always, there is silence. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of concentration, the silence that gathers when a person is deeply, faithfully present to a task, the silence that feels almost like prayer. Marked by the moon, the weaver returns to the loom night after night, as if answering a call that does not come in words. The room changes with the hours. Sometimes golden hour light warms the frame like honey on wood. Sometimes a single oil lamp casts torch-like shadows, turning threads into glowing lines against darkness. Sometimes rain makes the world outside smell metallic, and the loom seems to hum more softly, as if listening. And if you listen long enough, you begin to feel it. The loom is a calendar. Not in numbers, but in repetition, in the same motion returning like seasons return, in the gradual growth of a cloth length like a child growing taller, in the way a pattern emerges only after patience, only after surrendering the need to rush. Time, too, is woven, not in a straight line, in crossings, in returns, in threads that vanish beneath others and reappear farther on. In the final reflection, the loom rests. The shuttle lies still. The taut lines remain like a quiet constellation stretched across the wooden frame. Dust settles, soft, slow, and pale, like starlight fallen into the room. A half-finished cloth hangs, its pattern incomplete, as if waiting for the next breath to continue it. We are left with gentle melancholy, not sadness that wounds, but sadness that deepens, like the twilight deepens the blue of the sky, because we understand something simple and enormous. Every day is a thread drawn through an unseen hand. We choose some colors, we inherit others. We knot and smooth and pull tight. We weave what we can in the small rooms of our lives, believing that the pattern matters even when no one applauds. Perhaps it was never meant to be fully seen from within the weaving. Perhaps the meaning lives not in the finished tapestry, but in the devotion of making. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and as sleep approaches, the loom's song fades into the softness of night, warp and weft dissolving into dream, until only the sense of thread remains, running quietly through time, threading silence into something warm. We open on a crossroads at dusk. Two paths pale as old bone splitting through a low, wind-brushed landscape. The sky is dusk blue, softened with faded copper near the horizon, as if the sun has melted into the earth and left only its memory behind. A faint wind moves through dry grasses and olive leaves, turning them gently like pages being read by an invisible hand. And there, where the roads divide, stands a small stone pillar, a herm. Rough at the base, rubbed smooth higher up by countless passing palms, it rises from the dust with quiet certainty, crowned by a calm, watchful head. Not grand like a temple god, not distant like a star, but present in the way a boundary is present, silent, unavoidable, and strangely intimate. It is said that travelers spoke less here, as if the very air asked them to listen. The question arrives like a traveler's whisper, soft, private, and full of wonder. Why did the Greeks place Hermes here, where choices split like branches? The herm does not answer. It stands in that ancient posture of stone, patient, unblinking, half touched by the last light, half swallowed by shadow. Yet beneath the silence it seems to hold something, not a command, not a map, but a certain kind of permission. The permission to step forward without certainty, the permission to be human in the presence of the unknown. We come closer, slowly. The stone is not flawless. It is pitted, weathered, veined with hairline cracks that catch dust. There are marks where oil has been poured, dark stains that soak into the surface like prayers that have lost their words. A garland of leaves hangs limp around the top, some fresh, some dried and curled. Near the base lies a small scatter, a coin dulled by time, a pinch of grain, a broken shell, perhaps a tiny bronze bead that caught the light once and then forgot how to shine. Offerings, modest and sincere, not meant to impress the heavens, only to acknowledge them. Whispers tell us this was the language of the roadside, small gifts left at the edge of choice, a way to say, I am crossing, a way to say, let the crossing be gentle. Hermes is not only a god of swift feet, he is the keeper of thresholds, doorways, markets, roads, borders, beginnings, endings, and that thin place where honest trade can become clever theft, where a promise can become a loophole, where the truth can tilt just slightly into something useful. In the quiet of the crossroads, his presence feels less like speed and more like balance, not the balance of stillness, but the balance of motion. The moment your foot lifts and you must trust that ground will meet you again. Marked by the moon, the herm's shadow lengthens. The face, if it is a face, becomes harder to read, and yet the title lingers in our mind like incense, smiling without a face. How can stone smile? Perhaps by refusing to judge, perhaps by holding both paths with the same calm attention, perhaps by remaining year after year while humans arrive trembling, decide, depart, return, different, always different, yet still human. We drift from the crossroads into the daily world that fed it, toward the agora. Not with sudden noise, but with a slow rise of sound, the way the sea grows audible before it is seen. A low hum of voices, the soft clink of bronze, the scrape of pottery set down, the occasional call of a vendor, swallowed quickly by the greater hush of a living city moving through its day. The agora is a threshold, too, a crossing of needs and wants, of trust and doubt, of hunger and bargaining. Here, goods are weighed, not only on scales, but in the subtle scales of human intention. Olive oil gleams in jars like captured sunlight. Figs are piled in dark softness. Wool lies in heaps like clouds brought down to earth. Bronze tools catch pale flashes. Coins pass from hand to hand, each one carrying a small stamp of authority, proof that value can be pressed into metal, that promise can become tangible. And above the marketplace, near a gate or corner, another herm stands, less lonely than the roadside one, but equally watchful. It sees the small negotiations, a glance that tests honesty, a smile that hides a trick, a fair trade made sacred by mutual respect. It is said that merchants murmured prayers without fully realizing they were prayers. A touch to stone before opening a stall, a drop of oil offered for luck, a quick thought sent upward like smoke. Let my scales be true, let my fortune be kind, let my day pass without harm. Messages move through the agora like birds changing direction mid-flight. A rumor light as dust, a warning sharp as salt, a letter carried by a runner, sealed with wax, warm from the hand that pressed it. Hermes lives in this movement, not as an abstract idea, but as the very act of passage, information crossing mouths, hands, streets, borders. He is the God who understands that nothing stays still, not even truth, not even intention. And this is where the mystery deepens, because Hermes is not a clean god. He is not one smooth story carved into marble. He is a sacred contradiction, protector and trickster, guide and misleader, light-fingered and luminous. The Greeks lived with this duality as they lived with weather, accepting that the world is not designed to be simple, that a safe journey and a sudden misfortune can share the same road, that a clever mind can be a blessing and a danger, that laughter can hide a knife, and kindness can be a mask, and yet that masks are part of life. Beneath the silence, we sense what the ancients understood. Morality is not always a straight path. Some days it is a crossroads in fog, and you must choose with limited light. Hermes does not remove the fog. He teaches you to walk in it. The implied forbidden knowledge hides in the crossroads itself. Not in secret words, not in stolen scrolls, but in a simple, unsettling truth. Sometimes the gods do not reveal the right path. They only offer the courage to step onto one. And the herm, small, steady, weathered, becomes a companion to that truth. The stone has been touched by hands that were trembling, hands that were eager, hands that were guilty, hands that were hopeful. It has been touched by those leaving for war and those returning from it, by brides going to new homes, by widows carrying news, by traders heading toward profit, by thieves heading toward risk, by children daring each other to run into the dark and back again. Where memory fades, stone keeps the warmth of palms. And because it keeps everything without speaking, it becomes a kind of sacred witness, a witness that does not punish, a witness that only watches. We move through daily rituals, small negotiations with uncertainty. A traveler, before departure, pauses at the herm and places a leaf garland with quiet care, a smear of oil, olive dark and fragrant, pressed onto the stone, a coin left not as payment, but as acknowledgement. I know I am crossing into the unknown. I honor the one who guards the crossing. After safe return, another offering, maybe humbler, maybe more grateful, a pinch of grain, a small cup of wine poured into dust, a touch to the stone as if to say, "You held the threshold steady while I was gone." Even thieves, whispers tell us, might honor Hermes, not because they were righteous, but because they understood skill and risk. Hermes was the patron not only of law-abiding trade, but of cunning, the thin line between a clever bargain and a con, the art of persuasion, the quickness of hands, the way a story can be shaped to open a door. And here, again, the contradiction does not resolve. It lingers like incense. Is Hermes good? Is he dangerous? The ancient answer, gentle and unsettling, is yes. He is the god who carries messages, and messages can save or ruin. He guides travelers, and travelers can be saints or scoundrels. He blesses commerce, and commerce can be fair or predatory. He is the guardian of the boundary, and boundaries are where rules become negotiable. Beneath the silence, the crossroads becomes a mirror. When you stand before it, you do not merely choose a road, you reveal something about yourself. What do you fear? What do you desire? Which story will you live next? The herm does not tell you. It simply stands there, smiling without a face, because perhaps the smile is not mockery. Perhaps it is compassion. A stone understanding that humans must decide, and must bear the weight of deciding, again and again, until the end of their days. A quiet recognition that choice is sacred because it is difficult. As the light fades, the landscape changes. The roads become darker ribbons, the olive trees become silhouettes, the sky deepens into a thicker blue, and the first stars appear, small, star-marked punctures in the dusk, as if the heavens are stitching their own tapestry above the earth. Night thickens, and at the crossroads the herm remains, half in shadow, the garland a faint circle, the oil stains glossy in the last trace of light, the coin near the base catching a final copper glint before darkness takes it. We linger on the stillness until it begins to feel alive. The wind speaks softly, dust spirals and settles. A distant owl calls once, then stops, as if listening, and we leave with the sacred hush of choices unmade. Not regret, something gentler, a feeling that the world is always splitting into possibilities, and we are always stepping into one without fully knowing what it contains. That uncertainty is not a flaw in life, but part of its design. That the gods, if they are kind, do not remove mystery. They teach us to live inside it. Perhaps it was never meant to be found, the perfect path. Perhaps the true blessing was never certainty. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And somewhere at a quiet crossroads, a stone pillar stands, crowned with calm, watchful silence, smiling without a face, holding the world's diverging roads as if they were two verses of the same ancient prayer. Not a bonfire, not a blaze meant to conquer darkness, only a steady tongue of light, humble and unafraid, breathing warmth into stone and silence. It moves as softly as a lullaby, rising, bowing, rising again, as if it is listening to the room and answering with gentle breath. The walls around it are old, sandstone yellow and clay red, soot-kissed near the ceiling. Shadows gather in corners like folded cloth. In the center, the fire sits within a low hearth, ringed by darkened stones smoothed by years of tending. Beneath the silence, a tender question arrives. In a world of thunderous gods, why did the Greeks guard a simple hearth as if it were a sacred gate? No thunder answers, only the soft crackle of embers settling, the faint sigh of heat moving through air, the quiet pulse of light on nearby pottery. It is said that Hestia was not the kind of goddess you looked up to find. She was the goddess you returned to. We enter a home at night. The door has closed against the outside wind. A hush wraps the room the way a blanket wraps shoulders. The scent of bread lingers, warm grain and smoke and salt, like the memory of nourishment still moving through the air. Quiet footsteps cross the floor, careful not to disturb the sleeping. A low table holds a simple bowl of oil, catching lamp glow like captured starlight, dusk blue reflected in a surface the color of faded copper. The hearth is the center, not the center of architecture, but the center of feeling. Here, the day's sharp edges soften. Here, voices lower without being told. Here, even worry becomes slower, as if it knows it cannot run forever inside warm walls. Hestia's presence is not a figure in the sky. It is a hush at the center, a steadiness that does not demand attention, yet quietly gathers everyone around it. In the flame's circle, family becomes a small universe, children drowsy, elders settled, hands warmed, food shared. A stranger who enters becomes a guest, not because the world is always kind, but because the hearth teaches the body to remember what kindness feels like. Whispers tell us that hospitality was not merely manners, it was sacred, because to share heat with another person is to make a vow without writing it down. To offer warmth is to say, for this moment you are safe. And the hearth is an object of devotion, not dramatic devotion, no procession of drums, only the slow, faithful tending of embers. Ash is swept carefully, fuel is placed with thought. The flame is never treated like an accident. It is treated like a living thing that must be respected. The first and last offering of a meal is given to the fire. A small piece of bread, a few drops of wine, a pinch of barley. The offering is not extravagant, it is intimate, like speaking the name of someone beloved. A prayer is spoken low enough to blend with breath, so that it feels less like a proclamation and more like a shared secret between the living and the unseen. Beneath the silence, the hearth becomes a gate. Not a gate to somewhere far away, a gate between ordinary life and the sacredness hiding inside it. because in ancient Greece, divinity was not only in mountaintops and oracles, not only in storms and victories. Divinity could sit down, divinity could settle, divinity could be quiet. It is said that Hestia was honored first among the gods at sacrifice, first and last, because she held the center that all other things circled. Zeus might rule the sky, Poseidon might shake the sea, Athena might sharpen thought, but Hestia held the place where people actually lived. Where memory fades, the hearth remains. It remembers the laughter that rose and vanished. It remembers arguments softened by tiredness. It remembers grief, too, those long nights when someone sat close to the embers because the warmth was the only thing that did not leave. In the flame's gentle sway, time becomes slower, and in that slowness we begin to understand why the hearth was guarded like treasure, because fire is fragile, because comfort is fragile, because home itself can disappear if not tended. Deep exploration moves outward, softly, as if the camera walks on wool. Beyond the single house lies the city. Beyond private warmth lies communal warmth. There, at the center of civic life, a communal fire is kept burning, steady as the polis's own heartbeat, a sacred flame in the Prytanean, watched and maintained, traded not merely as practical heat, but as the symbol of shared belonging. A city, after all, is not only walls and laws, it is a common center. It is said that when a new colony was founded across the sea, the settlers carried fire from the city's hearth, not just embers in a pot, home itself transported, a living link to origin, a promise that even in a strange land, the circle of warmth could be rebuilt. Imagine it, a clay vessel wrapped carefully, protecting a small glowing heart of coals, the ship rocking on oceanic dark, salt wind biting, sails creaking, and within the vessel the ember remains quietly alive, like a name carried across distances without being forgotten. This is not the spectacle of conquest, this is the ceremony of continuity, a people saying, "We will not begin from nothing, we will begin from a flame that remembers us." Marked by the moon, those voyages would have felt endless, water and sky and uncertainty, yet the ember's presence would have made the future less cold, because it whispered, "Wherever you go, you can make a center. Wherever you land, you can invite the gods to sit down again." And still, contradiction flickers gently in this warm light. People begged for peace beside the same warmth that watched blades sharpen. Oaths were sworn in soft light and broken in harsh sun. A man might warm his hands at night, then lift them to violence by day. A household might offer bread to the flame, then refuse mercy to a neighbor. A city might honor Hestia's communal hearth, then choose war with the very heat still glowing at its center. Hestia does not accuse, she holds, and in holding she reveals, not through judgment, but through steadiness, because a hearth is honest in its quiet way. It witnesses the full range of the human heart. It warms the righteous and the flawed without asking which is which. It offers its circle to those who will speak truth and to those who will disguise it. And perhaps that is the implied forbidden knowledge, that the divine may be simplest where we least look, not always in thunder, not always in prophecy, sometimes in the reliable warmth that keeps returning, night after night, asking only to be tended. Beneath the silence, we notice the small rituals that form a life. A child learning to place a stick just so, to coax flame rather than smother it. An elder tapping ash away, making room for fresh fuel, as if making room for tomorrow. A visitor stepping inside and pausing instinctively because the hearth's presence commands a kind of respectful stillness. Even the architecture bows to it. The room arranges itself around the center, as if acknowledging that what matters most is not a throne but a glow. The hearth teaches something that cannot be shouted. It teaches that sacredness can be repeated, not once, not in a single grand moment, but in 1,000 quiet returns. To feed the flame is to practice devotion without words. To gather around it is to admit you need warmth. To offer the first and last portion is to remember that nourishment is not guaranteed, that gratitude must be renewed like fire. And so, in a world of heroic epics and loud gods, Hestia remains the goddess of the pause, the place where the story stops running and sits down, the place where the body unknots itself, the place where the world feels, briefly, held. In the final reflection, the camera returns to the small flame. The room is calmer now. A bowl has been emptied, a cup turned upside down. The air holds the faint sweetness of smoke. The last conversation has dissolved into quiet. Outside, wind presses lightly against walls. Inside, the hearth answers with warmth. Embers settle into ash, not as an ending, but as a soft rearranging. A few sparks wink once, like distant stars acknowledging the night, then rest again. The flame remains, breathing softly, steady, unhurried, a presence that does not demand belief, only attendance. We leave with quiet certainty. Some gods are not shouted, they are lived, night after night, in a circle of warmth, in the simple act of keeping a small light alive. Perhaps it was never meant to be found in thunder. Perhaps it was always here, near the floor, near the hands, near the bread, beneath the silence. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And as sleep approaches, the hearth continues its patient song, a small flame, steady as a lullaby, where the gods, if they are kind, sit down with us and stay. We open on a mask resting in half light. It lies on a stone step, as if it has been set down with reverence, not carelessness, its edges catching the last warm hush of torchlight, its painted surface holding a thin sheen, as though the night itself has kissed it. The expression is fixed and unfixed at once, smiling, terrible, beautiful, a smile that could be invitation or warning, a beauty that does not comfort, yet does not turn away. The eyes are painted open, and they hold a silence that feels alive. Beneath the silence, a question arrives like a soft tremor in the ribs. Why did the Greeks invite holy unbinding into their ordered world? The mask does not answer. It never answers in words. It answers by being what it is, a threshold you can put on your face, a doorway that turns a person into an echo of something older than the self, older than the neat boundaries of names, trades, and family lines. In the distance, the air is damp. A thin mist clings low to the ground. The sky is dusk blue, and the moon, still young, hangs like a pale coin, marked by the moonlight that makes stone seem softer than it is. It is said that Dionysus arrives like this, not with trumpets, with a change in air, with a loosening, with dew. We drift toward the festival of Dionysus with meditative pacing, as if the scene itself is walking barefoot. Torches sway like slow fireflies. They do not rush. They bob gently, carried somewhere beyond our frame. Their light is golden and uneven, breathing across walls and columns, turning shadows into moving cloth. Somewhere nearby, wine is poured, dark as ink, thick as the memory of grapes crushed underfoot. The scent of it rises, sweet and sharp, braided with smoke and laurel and the faint mineral smell of night stone. Song begins, not as a sharp shout, but as a tide. It rises, falls, returns, wave after wave, until even the air seems to hum. Drums, if they are there, feel like distant heartbeats. Flutes, if they are there, feel like wind through reeds. The rhythm is not a demand, it is an invitation. Come closer, soften, let go of your tightness for a while. Dionysus is not only drink, he is the loosened knot. He is the door unlatched in the mind. He is the God who understands that human beings cannot stay braced forever, that the soul, held too tightly, begins to crack in hidden places, that order without release becomes a cage, even when the cage is beautiful. And so the city, so proud of its measure, its columns, its laws, makes room for something that looks like unmeasure, something that feels like wildness, but is, in truth, a ritual. The mask becomes our object. It sits at the center of the night's meaning, not because it is valuable in gold, but because it is valuable in transformation. A mask is a strange relic. It is hollow. It has no breath of its own, and yet when it is worn, it changes everything. It is said that a mask does not hide you, it reveals the part of you that has been waiting in the dark. The Dionysian mask is lifted, worn, removed, passed from hand to trembling hand, hands warmed by torchlight, hands stained with grape, hands that have carried grief and labor and silence. The mask turns each face into a surface for the god's echo. It turns a person into chorus, into creature, into myth. Not for forever, only for the night, only for the ceremony. But even a brief unbinding can rearrange the heart. We move slowly into the theater, not as an entertainment hall, but as an open chamber under the sky. Stone seats curve like a shallow bowl, ready to hold a city's breath. Behind the stage, the world is wider than walls. The dark slope of hills, the scattered starlight, the moon's quiet watch. It is said that tragedy was born here in the shadow of Dionysus. A strange fact at first. Why should the god of wine and ecstasy be honored with stories of suffering? And yet the answer feels present if you listen gently, because Greece carried a gentle contradiction at its heart, measure and madness braided together. The same city that prized law and debate, careful speech, controlled gesture, also gathered to watch kings fall and families break, to watch fate speak through dust, to watch the fragile thread of human pride snap under the weight of the gods. In the theater, the polis dreams aloud, safely, together, under open sky. Here, the community can look at the darkest truths without being destroyed by them, because the ritual holds them. The chorus sings what individuals cannot say alone. The actors speak what citizens fear to admit in daylight. The story becomes a veil, thin enough to show, thick enough to protect. Beneath the silence, we feel the implied forbidden knowledge glimmer. Perhaps the soul needs ritual spaces to dissolve, so it can return renewed. Perhaps unbinding is not the enemy of order. Perhaps it is the medicine that keeps order from becoming cruelty. Dionysus in this light is not chaos for its own sake. He is the sacred permission to soften, to cry, to laugh too loudly, to sway, to forget for a moment the tight shape of oneself. Because the Greeks knew what many later worlds try to deny, that humans carry private storms even while walking in public calm. So we move through daily life's edges. We see farmers in our mind's eye, not as faces, but as relics of work, calloused tools, a clay jug, straw scattered near a doorway. We see potters, wheels turned smooth, kiln-blackened bricks, bowls cooling in stacks like sleeping moons. We see mothers, empty cradles rocking slightly from a passing breeze, a small woven sandal left near a threshold. Each carries grief. Not always dramatic grief. Sometimes grief is simply fatigue. Sometimes grief is the ache of a child lost years ago that still visits at night. Sometimes grief is hunger remembered even when the pantry is full. Sometimes grief is a marriage that has become quiet in the wrong way. And the festival gives them something rare, communal release. Not escape, but a softened veil over sorrow, a place where the weight can be shared without being explained. The chorus rises again, song rising and falling like tide, and for a while the self melts into it. The boundaries blur. The city becomes one breathing body. The mask, wet with breath, feels like an object that has absorbed something unsayable, something heavy, something holy. It is said that Dionysus is also the god of twice born, not only because of his myths, but because of what he does to those who meet him in ritual. He unravels them just enough that they can be woven again, like cloth after washing, like soil after rain, like a mind after tears. And always the paradox remains gentle, never resolved into a simple moral. Dionysus offers joy, but joy that is edged with trembling. He offers laughter, but laughter that knows grief is nearby. He offers freedom, but freedom that can be frightening when you have lived too long inside walls. This is why the mask is both smiling and terrible, because to loosen the knot is to risk what spills out, yet to keep the knot forever is to risk becoming stone. Beneath the silence, the Greeks chose a third way. They ritualized the unbinding. They contained it in festival days, in sacred nights, in structured ceremonies under the gaze of the city and the gods. They made a room for madness so that madness would not devour the room. And in that room, something tender happened. People returned to themselves, newly softened, newly able to bear life again. In the final reflection, the festival fades into dew and quiet. Torches burn low, the last song thins into a few lingering notes, then into footsteps, then into nothing. The theater empties slowly, stone seats cooling under night air. A thin mist returns to the ground, as if the earth is exhaling. Somewhere the mask rests again, on a step, on a cloth, on a low altar, its painted eyes still open, its mouth still curved, its surface damp with breath and moonlight. The moisture catches the silver blue glow and makes the mask seem newly alive, newly washed, newly secret. The world is calm. Not because the wildness was false, but because it has completed its circle. Dawn approaches gently, like a hand smoothing hair, and the self, which melted into chorus, begins to reform, quietly, without strain. The day's shape returns, names return, roles return, yet something inside remains looser, less brittle. We leave with melancholic wonder. How easily the self can melt into chorus, how gently dawn reweaves it. Perhaps it was never meant to be held tight, the human spirit. Perhaps it was always meant to loosen and return, like tide. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and somewhere beneath the silence of a waking city, the Dionysian mask stays wet with moonlight, waiting for the next sacred night when words become song and song becomes smoke and the soul remembers how to breathe. Night settles over a sacred grove, not abruptly, not like a curtain dropped in haste, but slowly, like ash settling, like a breath lengthening as the world grows quiet. The last warmth of day slips away from the bark of trees. The air cools, and the shadows deepen into a velvet that does not feel empty, only attentive. The grove feels watched, not harshly, with a cool, untamed tenderness, like moonlight touching a sleeping face. The opening image is small, almost weightless, a deer's eye catching starlight, a bead of dark glass reflecting the sky's pale punctures. In that reflection there is no speech, no argument, no explanation, only the living fact of attention. The deer does not demand meaning, it simply is, and in being it turns the grove into something holy. Beneath the silence, a question arrives, like a soft arrow, straight, quiet, and impossible to ignore. What did it mean to honor the wild while living behind walls? Somewhere beyond the grove, the city sleeps, stone and lamp and lock. Walls hold warmth, doors hold safety, names and laws hold order like a net. But here, under branches and stars, order loosens, The world feels older than rules, older than plans. Here, the forest does not argue, it simply persists. It is said that Artemis lives in such places, not as a portrait, as presence, a hush that has teeth if you forget to be gentle, a coolness that is not cruelty but clarity. Artemis is the guardian of thresholds, girlhood and womanhood, forest and city, safety and sudden fear. The thin line where the known world ends and the unknown begins. And the grove, breathing under moonlight, becomes a map of those lines, drawn not in ink, but in instinct. We drift, slowly, toward Browron, not rushing through time, but moving as one moves through tall grass, careful, receptive, quiet enough to hear what leaves remember. Browron sits near the coast, where the air carries an oceanic salt and the ground holds the damp scent of reeds. The sanctuary is not a palace of marble grandeur, it is something more intimate. Stones and porticos, a stream nearby, a sacred boundary traced by habit and prayer. Whispers tell us that young girls once served Artemis here, in rites both playful and solemn. They moved in groups, like pale flickers through torchlight, like small moons passing between columns. Their voices rose in song that was not meant to entertain, but to shape the air. Gentle notes folded into the night, like offerings that could be heard. Some called them little bears, the arctoi of Artemis, not because they were wild, but because they were learning the edge of wildness, that fierce inner life that must be respected, that must be guided without being broken. The sanctuary holds their presence in absence. We do not see faces. We see what remains when time dissolves the living. Small offerings, a carved figure left on stone, simple, rough, sincere. A strip of woven cloth, frayed at the edge, colored in clay red and misty green, folded like a secret. A lock of hair tied with cord, surrendered as if placing a hand upon an unseen gate. A tiny sandal set down and never reclaimed. Offerings appear like quiet sentences spoken to the divine. I am growing, I am changing, I am crossing. Where memory fades, these objects still glow with meaning, because the Greeks understood that growth is not only private, it is sacred, it is dangerous, it is a threshold. And Artemis, in her moonlit way, stood at that threshold, not as a soft nurse of comfort, but as a guardian who refuses to let the boundary be treated lightly. Deep exploration reveals layered contradiction. Artemis protects the young, yet demands respect that can feel like shadow. She is gentle as moonlight, cool, silver, soothing in its distance, yet swift as punishment when boundaries are crossed. This is difficult for the modern mind, which longs to categorize, good or bad, safe or unsafe, kind or cruel. Artemis does not fit into clean jars. She is the goddess of the edge, and edges are not always comfortable. The myths hover around her like mist, Actaeon's forbidden gaze. It is said he saw what he should not have seen, Artemis bathing, the goddess unveiled. The story is not told as a love story, not as a tragedy of romance, but as a lesson etched into the night. Not all mysteries endure being looked at directly. Some sacredness requires distance. Some holiness survives only when approached with restraint. Actaeon is punishment, his transformation, his tearing apart, hovers like a dark wing. Yet even here, beneath the silence, the message is not only fear, it is boundary. It is the idea that to look is not always neutral, that attention can be a kind of taking, that the gaze can cross lines the hand never touches. The implied forbidden knowledge is subtle. Reverence may be a kind of restraint, not repression, not shame, a restraint that honors what cannot be owned. The grove teaches this without speeches. It teaches through atmosphere, through the way the trees seem to hold their breath when you step too loudly, through the way moonlight makes every clearing feel like a stage where you are not the only one present, through the way the deer's eye, still as a pool, reflects you without judgment, and in that reflection you feel your own weight. Daily life in Greece bent around these invisible lines, where one may walk, what one may speak, how one may look. The forest was not simply scenery, it was a realm with its own laws, older than the city's laws, written not in stone decrees, but in consequences. Hunters knew this, shepherds knew this, mothers sending children to gather herbs near the edge of trees knew this. The wild was necessary. It fed the city with game, with wood, with medicinal leaves. Yet it could also swallow someone whole. To honor Artemis was to honor that truth without trying to tame it, to acknowledge that not everything exists for human comfort, to admit that safety is precious precisely because it is not guaranteed. In Brauron, the rites did not erase fear. They taught how to live beside it without becoming hardened. A girl at the threshold of adulthood needed more than instructions. She needed a ritual, a sacred frame that told her this crossing matters, and you are not alone in crossing it. The goddess sees you, not with harshness, but with the cool attentiveness of the moon. The goddess demands respect, not to wound you, but to keep you awake to the power of what you are becoming. Artemis is faceless in the dark, and that is her power, because a face invites familiarity. A face tempts the mind to believe it understands. But Artemis is not meant to be domesticated in thought. She is the boundary itself, present, silent, absolute. She cannot be bargained with like a neighbor. She cannot be softened by excuses. She is the reminder that the wild has its own dignity. Beneath the silence, we sense the strange tenderness of this, a tenderness that does not wrap you in constant comfort, but teaches you how to stand, how to keep your eyes honest, how to keep your desires from turning into trespass, how to know where you end and another sacred thing begins. The grove becomes a teacher of quiet ethics, written not in law, but in hush. A fallen branch becomes a warning, do not take without need. A hidden clearing becomes a lesson, do not enter with arrogance. The moon's cool light becomes a mirror, see yourself and do not pretend you are harmless. This is not a morality of shame. It is a morality of reverence. The kind that says the world is not yours. The kind that says your life is intertwined with lives you cannot fully understand. The kind that says restraint is not weakness, it is a form of wisdom. As the night deepens, the grove grows more luminous in its own quiet way. Misty green leaves catch silver blue highlights. Sandstone stones along the sanctuary path glow faintly as if remembering torches from centuries ago. Dust spirals at the edge of a clearing, then settles again. Somewhere, water moves in a small stream, a sound like whispered cloth, and always the sense of watchfulness remains, not a threat, a presence. The deer lifts its head. Its eye catches starlight again, and the reflection shifts, an entire sky rearranged within a single living gaze. Then it is gone, swallowed by shadow, leaving only the idea that the wild has witnessed you and allowed you to remain. In the final reflection, wind moves through leaves like a slow exhale. The grove breathes. Boundaries breathe too, expanding, contracting, not drawn in ink, but felt in the body. The line between safety and fear, between curiosity and trespass, between human order and wild dignity. Artemis remains faceless in the dark, and that facelessness is not emptiness, it is distance, the sacred kind. We leave with calm melancholy, not sadness that bites, but sadness that softens, because we know the wild still waits beyond the candle's circle, patient, holy, not asking to be understood, only respected. Perhaps it was never meant to be brought fully into the bright rooms of the city. Perhaps the grove must remain a little veiled so its power can continue to breathe. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And as sleep approaches, the moon holds the trees in silver quiet, and the boundaries, unseen, undeniable, continue their gentle breathing, like a lullaby sung by the wild itself. Black water breathes in slow, heavy pulses, as if the sea has lungs hidden beneath its skin. Each wave arrives without hurry, folds itself into pale foam, white as old bone, and retreats again, leaving the sand smoothed like a page erased clean. The air tastes of salt and distance. The sky is dusk blue, scattered with star-marked points that feel too cold and too beautiful to belong to anyone. Near the waterline sits a small altar, not grand, not guarded, a simple stone block crusted with salt, its edges softened by years of wind and spray. It looks as though the sea has been touching it gently for a very long time, leaving behind a thin white bloom like sacred frost. Beneath the silence, a question rises like mist. How did the Greeks trust their lives to the sea and call its trembling vastness divine? The sea does not answer, it only keeps breathing. And in that breathing, we begin to understand why the altar exists at all. Because the sea is not a road, it is not a promise, it is a presence, vast, listening, and indifferent in the way mountains are indifferent. To step onto it is to step into uncertainty made physical. And so, before the first rope is loosened, before the first sail takes wind, the Greeks paused. They offered. They asked. They borrowed courage from the edge of the world. We follow Poseidon not as storm alone, but as sacred uncertainty itself. He is the god who holds the horizon like a moving gate, the god who turns trade into a gamble, travel into a prayer, and return into something that must be earned again and again. He is not only the breaker of ships, not only the shaker of earth. He is the deep reminder that human hands, however skilled, cannot command everything. The altar becomes our object, a humble stone where sailors left offerings, oil, wine, a pinch of grain, before pushing into darkness. Oil poured slowly, glistening briefly before the salt drinks it. Wine splashed like a small bruise of color against pale stone. Grain scattered, tiny seeds thrown into the night as if to say, "Let this voyage be planted in safety, let it grow into return." Sometimes a coin, dull and greened by sea wind, is pressed into a crack. Sometimes a strip of cloth, knotted and frayed, left behind like a vow. Sometimes only a touch, fingers placed on cold stone, then lifted away, as if the sailor is trying to leave part of his fear there. It is said the wind carries prayers best when they are whispered, so the words are kept low, blending with breath, offered not with certainty, but with a kind of humble honesty. Let the sea be gentle, let the god look away from anger, let my hands remain steady. We drift through harbor life in soft detail. Rope coiled like sleeping serpents on damp planks. Nets hung to dry, their knots tight as decisions. Amphora stacked in shadow, clay-red bodies sealed with wax, filled with oil, wine, grain, salted fish. The smell is a mixture of tar and brine, of wet wood and old smoke, of quenched herbs and human sweat. Everything feels prepared and not prepared, ready and trembling. A ship rests against the pier like a living creature asleep. Its hull is dark and worn, stained by many voyages. The grain of its wood shows in torchlight, lines like the wrinkles of an old face. The mast rises into mist. The sail, furled, is a pale bundle like folded cloud. Marked by the moon, the harbor seems half real, half dream. Torchlight trembles on water, shadows move over stacked crates. A gull cries once and falls quiet, as if remembering that night is sacred to the sea. Poseidon is present here too, not only out in the deep, but in every small act of preparation, in the tightening of a knot, in the rubbing of pitch into seams, in the way a sailor pauses and listens to the wind as if it might speak. Deep exploration opens the sea's contradictions. It feeds and it devours. It connects islands like beads on a string, and it breaks ships like brittle toys. The sea is the great road of the Greek world, carrying olives and pottery, stories and songs, armies and brides. It is also the great mouth, swallowing those same things without apology. To live near it is to live near a god who does not explain himself. Myths glide through the foam like pale shapes beneath water. Theseus setting sail, youth and courage braided together, a promise of return tied to a sail's color. The story feels simple until you remember how the sea makes even simple promises fragile. One wrong signal, one forgotten detail, and grief arrives like a wave you cannot outrun. Odysseus, tossed by a god's mood, years stretched into wandering, home turned into a distant star. His story is not only adventure, it is the long lesson that the sea answers on its own time, that no cleverness can fully tame it, that pride is a dangerous offering to bring before Poseidon. And beneath these famous tales there are quieter rumors, drowned cities, streets and chambers beneath waves like forgotten rooms, a column glimpsed under clear water, star-marked with barnacles, a temple's foundation swallowed and sealed by silt. Whispers tell us the sea keeps its own archives, buried, veiled, oceanic, where memory fades into salt. The implied forbidden knowledge is felt in every departure. No bargain with Poseidon is complete, because the sea never signs its name. You can offer oil, you can pour wine, you can swear vows into the wind, but the sea does not become your servant. The god does not become your employee. The deep answers with weather, with current, with sudden silence or sudden teeth. And so daily life becomes a ritual of thresholds, families at the pier, hands raised in blessing, a last touch of the ship's wood, as if it were a living creature that must be spoken to gently. In the torchlit haze you can feel the tenderness of these gestures, not theatrical, practical, because every departure carries the possibility of becoming final. A mother presses a small charm into a seam of the sailor's cloak. A father sets his palm on the mast once, as if giving his strength to the wood. A friend offers a smile that is more a bruise than a blessing. No one says too much. The sea hears words, and words can become heavy. Beneath the silence, the ship pulls away. The rope is loosened. The hull shifts. The water accepts it without comment. For a moment, the vessel is still near land, still within reach of shouted names. Then it moves outward, into darkness where the horizon is only a suggestion. And in that moment, courage is revealed as something fragile, not the loud kind, the quiet kind, borrowed, held carefully. Because everyone knows, even successful voyages carry a quiet grief. Every return proves someone else did not. A harbor is a place of reunions, yes, arms raised, laughter, relief poured like wine, but it is also a place of absence, a place where someone stands a little too long, scanning the line of sea, waiting for a sail that will not come. A place where a ship returns with fewer footsteps than it took away. The Greeks lived with this. They built their lives around the sea's generosity and its appetite. They took what it offered, fish, trade routes, new lands, and they accepted what it demanded in return, uncertainty, patience, loss. And in that acceptance, the divine became real. Not because the sea was kind, because it was powerful, because it could not be owned, because it shaped human fate with the same indifferent rhythm as tide. The altar at the shore is not a superstition, it is a recognition, a small human stone placed before an immense non-human presence, a way of saying, We know we are small. We come anyway. We return, slowly, to the shoreline at night. The altar sits alone under stars. The salt crust glows faintly in moonlight, pale as bone. A smear of dried wine stains one corner like an old bruise. A few grains rest in a crack, softened by damp air. The wind moves across the stone, and you could almost believe the altar is breathing too, quietly, patiently, holding the residue of countless requests. The tide comes in. Foam reaches toward the altar's base, then retreats. It erases footprints with gentle indifference. The sand smooths itself again and again, as if the sea is teaching the same lesson without getting tired. Nothing human lasts untouched here. Not plans, not pride, not even grief, though grief feels endless while it lives in the body. And yet the altar remains, a stubborn little witness. A place where courage was borrowed night after night, where sailors placed their fear down for a moment so they could lift their bodies onto the gangplank, where families offered tenderness to the wind because tenderness was all they could control. We leave with sacred uncertainty, understanding that the sea does not promise, it permits. It allows a crossing sometimes. It refuses other times. It gives and it takes without explaining. Perhaps it was never meant to be understood like a law. Perhaps it was meant to be approached like a god, through ritual, humility, and the quiet bravery of stepping forward anyway. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and as sleep approaches, the black water keeps breathing, the foam keeps writing and erasing, the salt altar keeps its pale vigil under the stars, while courage, like a boat, is borrowed, and the sea never signs its name. Night here feels clean, as if the darkness has been rinsed and laid carefully over the hills. Pine trees stand like silent guardians, their needles holding the faint scent of resin. Somewhere far off, a thin thread of smoke rises from a hearth and dissolves into the dusk blue sky. The air tastes cool, quiet enough to hear your own heartbeat as a gentle drum, quiet enough to notice how the world breathes when no one is speaking. The sanctuary rests among these slopes like a listening ear. Stone steps worn smooth, courtyards dusted with pale sand, columns that patch moonlight on their edges, and beyond, the famous theater, an open bowl under stars, reminding us that Greece knew how to build places for the voice. But tonight, this is not a place for voice. Tonight is for the hush. The opening image is simple and sacred. A sleeper on a woven mat, breathing slowly beneath a high, quiet roof. No bed of luxury, no heavy curtains, only a mat, reed or wool, rough and honest, laid on cool stone. The sleeper's breath rises and falls like the tide's small sister, steady and unhurried. Above, beams and rafters disappear into shadow. A lamp burns low at the edge of the room, its flame barely moving, as if even fire has learned to be respectful. Beneath the silence, a question arrives, soft as an eyelid closing. When pain had no name, How did the Greeks ask the divine to mend what was hidden? In a world without our words for illness, without diagnoses pinned like labels, pain could feel like a stranger living inside the body, a heaviness in the chest, a trembling in the joints, a fever that came and went like a jealous spirit, a grief so old it had become physical. People carried these things quietly, often alone, until the burden grew too heavy, and then they came here, to Epidaurus, to the god who did not roar from the sky, but arrived like hope arriving, gently, persistently, with soft authority. Asclepius enters not with thunder, he enters with the steady calm of a physician's hands, hands you can almost imagine even when you cannot see them. He is the god of healing, yes, but more than that, the God who suggests that suffering is not always a sentence, that the body, however fragile, might still be guided back toward wholeness. The sacred practice becomes our mystery, incubation, sleep as a gate where healing might cross. It is said that those who came to Asclepius did not come only for herbs or bandages. They came for the night itself, for the possibility that dreams could carry a remedy the waking mind could not reach. The Abaton, the sleeping hall, holds them like a long, quiet breath. Here, the ritual begins before anyone lies down. It begins with washing, water poured over hands, over wrists, over the face, the body made ready not in vanity but in reverence, as if cleanliness is a way of telling the unseen, I am listening. It continues with fasting or simple food, not punishment, but clearing, a slow turning away from heaviness so the dream can arrive unbroken. Outside, the world keeps its noise, markets, arguments, errands, the clatter of daily survival. Inside the sanctuary, that noise is set down like a burden placed beside a door. Silence becomes medicine. Offerings are laid, small models of limbs, clay feet, clay hands, tiny sculpted ears, a miniature womb, each one a symbol of the body speaking in a language older than words. Coins placed softly on stone, catching moonlight like small pale moons. A strip of woven cloth, a sprig of laurel, a prayer whispered low enough that it blends with breath. Each offering says, in its own quiet way, I have carried this pain alone. I bring it to the threshold now. Beneath the silence, we sense the sanctuary gathering its patience the way a shore gathers waves. Farmers, soldiers, mothers, old men whose knees have become storms, young people whose sleep has been haunted. Each arrives with a private ache and a cautious hope, hope that feels too tender to speak loudly. Deep exploration reveals the gentle contradiction between faith and flesh. Because the Greeks were not strangers to practical medicine, they trusted herbs and hands, they knew plants, they knew poultices, oils, clean water, steady care. They knew that bodies heal through time, through rest, through skilled attention. And yet, they also trusted visions. They also trusted the night's sacred theater. They believed that some ailments were not purely physical. that some wounds lived in the invisible place where mind and body braid together, that the soul can bruise the flesh, and the flesh can dim the soul. In Epidaurus, the contradiction was not a conflict, it was a braid. Nature and divinity, touch and dream, the waking world and the world behind the eyelids. It is said that Asclepius came in dreams, sometimes as a figure, sometimes as a feeling, sometimes as an instruction as simple as a plant name or a gesture. The dream might show a snake curling around a limb like a living bandage. It might show a clear spring, a bath, a change of diet, a path to walk in morning light. It might show surgery performed by unseen hands, pain lifting as if a knot were cut. Snakes, emblems of renewal, glide through the imagination like living ribbons, not as horror, but as promise. A snake sheds its skin without apology, leaving the old behind in a dry ghost of itself. It emerges glossy, new, alive in a way that feels almost miraculous. In a sanctuary of healing, this becomes a symbol the heart can understand even when the mind cannot. You too might shed what has clung too long. The implied forbidden knowledge shimmers beneath the rites. Perhaps the gods heal not by erasing sorrow, but by teaching the soul a new way to carry it. This is the kind of knowledge that does not shine in daylight. It lives in the soft hours before dawn, when a person wakes and cannot fully explain what changed, only that something inside feels less clenched. Some are cured, some are not. The uncertainty itself becomes part of the rite, and this too is strangely gentle. Because the sanctuary does not promise what it cannot control. It offers a threshold, not a guarantee. It offers a dream chamber, not a contract. The sea does not sign its name, and neither does illness, and so healing, when it comes, feels like a visitor whose arrival cannot be forced. In the Abaton, the sleepers lie spaced apart like quiet islands in a dark sea. A lamp glows at the edge. A faint draft moves through the hall. Someone exhales, then another. The rhythm of breathing becomes communal, like a chorus too soft to hear, yet present all the same. Quote, "Where healing walks barefoot," end quote. The phrase feels true here, because whatever moves through this chamber does not stomp, it does not announce itself. It steps lightly, like a careful physician, like a compassionate God, like the mind's own hidden wisdom. It walks without shoes, so it will not wake the fragile threshold between waking and dream. Beneath the silence, the dream arrives, not like a story with a neat beginning and end, but like mist entering a room, filling spaces, changing the air, leaving moisture on the skin. The sleeper turns slightly. A hand relaxes, a brow smooths. Somewhere inside, an image rises, a snake, a spring, a hand, a leaf, a door. In the morning, the dream might be remembered clearly, or it might dissolve, leaving only a feeling, an aftertaste like herbs, a quiet confidence, a new patience. The sanctuary holds both outcomes without judgment, because sometimes healing is not a dramatic reversal. Sometimes it is a small shift, a pain that is still there, but no longer terrifying, a grief that remains but is now bearable, a body that still aches but is now accompanied by hope. Daily life gathers at the sanctuary again as dawn approaches. The sky lightens from dusk blue to pale gray. Birds begin their soft questions in the trees. The stone courtyards cool with morning air. Footsteps move quietly. No one wants to break the fragile spell of night too abruptly. Offerings remain on altars, glinting faintly. Clay limbs lined up like a silent anatomy of longing. Coins catching light. Woven cloth fluttering slightly in a breeze. The architecture itself seems to exhale, releasing the night's patience back into the world. Some leave with a story half seen. Quote, "I dreamed the god touched my shoulder." End quote. Quote, "I saw water and woke with thirst." End quote. Quote, "A snake passed over my leg and the pain eased." End quote. Quote, "I heard a voice say, 'Wait.'" End quote. Others leave with no vision at all, and yet still with something, because even the act of lying down in sacred silence has changed the tempo of their suffering. They have been held, they have been witnessed, they have entered a ritual that admits pain without shame. In the final reflection, dawn brightens the threshold. Light enters the sleeping hall in a thin band, revealing dust motes that drift like pale stars falling slowly. The mats are empty now. The room is quiet again, but not empty, never empty. The air still feels listened to. Footsteps fade. The sanctuary returns to its steady stillness, as if it has always been waiting for the next wave of aching bodies, the next set of whispered prayers. We are left with a quiet reverence for the dream, an unseen physician moving through the chamber of sleep, not always curing, always touching. Sometimes the touch is only the reminder that the body is not alone in its struggle, that the night, when approached with reverence, can become a doorway, that hope, when it enters, does so barefoot, so softly we might miss it unless we are very still. Perhaps it was never meant to be proven, perhaps it was meant to be felt. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and as sleep approaches again, the dream chamber remains, high-roofed, quiet, pine-scented, waiting in the dark with gentle patience, as if healing itself is a kind of sacred silence learning how to speak. And now, as the echoes of ancient Greece fade into the distance, the temples grow quiet and the gods return to the stars. The stories of myths, rituals, and daily life remain, gently woven into the fabric of time. If sleep has found you, may it be deep and peaceful. If you are still awake, let the calm linger just a little longer. Thank you for sharing this moment with Twilight Tale. Rest well, and when the night calls again, another story will be waiting. Good night.